Hello. Thank you for I'm here. Be here. My name is Søren Knudsen. I'm an independent researcher or cybersecurity consultant in OT. I have my own company, and it's only me. So what I will talk about today is looking into what I define as a good cybersecurity assessment. And this talk is actually coming up for this conference because there's been a lot of talks. What is the difference between IT and OT cybersecurity? What do we need to look more into? But before I went to dig into the things, I would like you to inform you of one. I think it was it's relevant. I will use it in something in the session. But last night, Mandiant did release a blog on a new OT malware that is called Cosmic Energy. So if you want to read it, I read it yesterday, and it was very well. Again, it's another attack vector. We have seen many like it before, but it's worth mentioning, and I would recommend going through the reading. But first of all, when we do a cybersecurity assessment in the industrial environment, as in many other places, the key is understanding. I will get back to this. I use this slide because it is critical that we understand. It is critical that we understand the environment, that we understand what is happening. And this is the reason because if we don't understand what we are going to assess, it's very, very difficult to secure it. So I'll coming back to that many times. But I would like you to think about back to this slide when I'm going through the other slides, and always think about how can we better understand. When we can better understand, in my perspective, we can have a lot better way to secure our environments. My primary area of work is electricity, so in the energy sector. But I have added some manufacturing because I'm doing a bit there as well. Again, this is to get a broader view and get a better understanding. So the slides will be a kind of jumping a bit, but there's a reason for that. So the first ones here is actually thinking about what do we need to understand and why. So the base when we do an assessment is actually mechanics. Because if you don't understand the mechanics in the plant, we cannot understand the automation because that is built on the mechanics. And if you don't understand the automation of it, we miss a lot of threat vectors. So let's think about this robot arm. So why did I take that? A robot arm has many what we call joints, so angles, it's rotating. So when that is happening, this is a very simple one. But when that is happening, it needs to have a base. So the base is sitting in the PLC. So there's a lot of communication between the PLC and the mechanics of the arm. So think about this. If just one of them is squeezed off a bit in a number, what happened? Yeah, it might not fetch the things that it should fetch, or it could sweep out the arm where it's supposed not to be. And there might be a human being there, right? So I'm just using this as an example. This is all the way through. This is why we need to understand what the mechanics is doing. We need to understand what is happening. So when you want to attack, so what we are building here is actually how can we attack our own. We need to think like a hacker. I'll get back to that as well. But we need to understand this, and how can this best way when we think about a PLC. I'm not a process engineer, but I know a lot about, or about some PLCs at least. From a basic level, it will have some inputs, it will write to the table, it will do some outputs. Very basic, I'm talking now. But what if I squeeze off? What if I change the data register? What can this do for this robot arm? This is areas where we don't have until now, or not many, some of you probably doing it already, but we need to think into this. And this is actually what I want to go more deep into in this session, is like we need to understand the mechanics, we need to understand the automation of this before we are protecting it. So this is a way to do, and between the arm and the PLC, we have a high-speed link. Well, we heard that before today. We need a very high-speed link. Yes, this is the case as well. The funny part, when you go through a manufacturer plant, you have several of those, but you can have several manufacturers. You have several PLCs manufacturers, so it's quite different. So I normally say one plant or one manufacturing plant, there's no equal. I've been to very many, especially in energy. There is equal. So you cannot set a standard for this. So in my head, what can be manipulated? How can this be done? If we understand the easiest way, then we are on a good step. Let me give you an example. It's not about a robot arm, but it was a manufacturing plant I was doing an assessment on. And I was like, okay, what is the critical here? So crown jewel analysis, business impact assessment, or whatever we call it. We just need to get the facts. What are we doing? So they said, the label printer. It's like, what? Yeah, the label printer. This is very important for us because if we don't have the label printer, we will not be able to ship them out. And we only have so and so much stocks. So we shut down the plant. So suddenly a label printer was a critical entity. And first thing I was like, that was strange, but I didn't expect that. But it's true. And when you understand it, yes, small things like a label printer can actually be some of your crown jewel in a manufacturing plant. So what about the energy sector? And this is what is happening in the energy sector. For those of you who know it, you can take a nap or whatever. But when we are producing or distributing energy, we have this frequency, what we call synchronization. This is the top right frequency here. So thinking about this in a very simple way, we need to produce and use as much energy so it's synchronized. If we go way out of this, we get a collapse. So when we are doing assessment on electricity in this, we need to understand what level of megawatts is enough to collapse the DSO network. If we don't know that, we don't know how critical this plant is. So again, an example here, but yeah, this is a huge plant and so on. That's not the critical one often. The critical one can be the smaller ones where there's not that many other plants nearby, and the grid is vulnerable because you don't have that much power out. And you probably maybe have some kind of hospital or something like that. I was in an assessment on a very small plant. It was on an island, but it was the only plant that was on that island. So if that shut down, no water, no electricity, no gasoline, because you couldn't, electricity is needed to pump up this thing anyway. So this is why a very little plant was actually suddenly much more critical than a 400, 500, and 1 terabyte plant. So why I'm saying this is like thinking about this, thinking about the society around, this is where critical infrastructure makes a difference. We need to understand that. We need to understand what we are assessing. So in this case, we need to go, when we talk about critical infrastructure, we need to go beyond what is the business, but what is the impact of society. If we don't understand that in kind of high level, we don't need to do all the details, we have a different difficulty to make the real assessment because we don't know how critical this part or this is for this area of the community. So what is the consequences? Well, the consequences is a grid collapse. And what is the consequence of a grid collapse? Well, if you're in a hospital, it might be critical, right? If you can't get clean water, you have, of course, some time, but it needs to be assessed. So this is what I see a big difference when we are doing OT assessments is actually understanding. So back to my first slide, it's understanding. We need to understand what we are assessing. When we are doing it in IT, yes, it probably doesn't get that mail or that server went down or something like that, but here we have human people in. We can have one or more that has died, produce this. I have seen a 160 kilowatt substation that collapsed because of a switch. And the first time I went there, I said, this is a switch. Yeah, okay, this is a light switch, but this switch is kind of like this, right? And this is just doing on and off. So it's very important to understand. So when we have some idea of the criticality, we can go more to the more basic, or not the basics, but more the known areas where we're. So should we do a visit? Is possible? Definitely, because where could you else get that information about the mechanics? I know that a lot of people say this is expensive. Yes, but there's a difference. Do you want a high quality or not a high quality? So I normally go out to say we need to collect some information before we go in to do the visit. And this is some of the collection of asset inventory if they have. Normally they don't have. So network diagrams and so on. So when I'm looking at the network diagrams, I'm trying to create my question list. Before when I get to the visit, you need to have a lot of questions. The more the better almost. Because you need to get this understanding. So if going back, I'll just take some ideas of this. And so let's look at the network diagram. And when we look at that, when we have heard the talks here, we have the OT, we have the IT side, we might have the industrial DMZ. And this looks very easy. It's kind of a, when I present to management, it needs to be very easy boxes, right? No details. But what is the integration here? So I normally call a blurred area I call integration points. If you look back for this cosmic energy malware, if you read into that, you'll see that that is using a Microsoft SQL database. That SQL database is used to communicate IC104 to the RTUs, etc. So this SQL database, is that IT or OT? SAP production, is that IT or OT? But it could have a connection. So the really difficult here is not saying this is IT and OT, it's the blurry part, because you have a lot of OT in IT, and you have some IT in OT as well. So where do we have the connection? So this is actually what I'm trying to figure out when I'm sitting with my asset inventory, where I'm sitting with my network diagram, and I prepare where can I collect PCAPs. So where can I do the traffic flow? Because they don't know normally what protocol there is used. Yes, they know 80%, but there's always some more. This is what happens when you build something, you change something, and yeah. So that's human. So if you look at this integration, this is exactly what the cosmic energy is doing. It's writing to SQL database. Yes, where is that? Is that IT or OT? This is actually one of the tricky parts. So two really important parts, I normally say, understand the factory, understand the mechanics, understand all this automation, and be really good at trying to understand the integration points here. Because everybody has integration. And then people come and say, oh, we have a segmented architecture. We don't have any connection between them. Yes, you do. There is no one production today. I've seen that it's an air-gapped system. So I normally say, if you get air-gapped, what is an air-gapped? Oh, air-gapped if you have a firewall. No, an air-gapped is where you have air in between, right? So, and you need that because that is part of the digitalization process. This is part of how we do manufacturing today or producing energy. So preparing, get boots on the ground, go out there and see, and watch the best thing I ever had when I was out there was actually having a process engineer that's also an operator that showed me around the plant. That was awesome. Because he was telling me that it was a natural gas factory, how they did with the pH values to push it down, push it up again, and all the structure of this, so it actually was a chemical factory, but based on how could you produce most energy. It was really interesting. And then you got the view. I did, at least at that time. So when you're at site, you need to ask all these questions. You need to take interviews, IT staff, process engineers, trying to get a grab. It's not possible to understand everything because they are so complex. But it is important so you get a high-level view of what you're dealing with. And then you can select your PCAPs and do all this. And then when you're doing your analysis, you need to think like a hacker, or think how can I exploit this? Or how can I do most pain for this one? And this can be a simple PLC. We saw before today, a guy was talking about the metering, how they can access the network through the SIM card, right? This is actually, there's a lot of connections we don't see. This is what we do. Call it modeling, call it analysis, call it what you want. It's just by finding all the weak points. So in that we do understand the protocols, and a lot it doesn't have any security, but it's supposed not to have it. This is real-time operating system. It's not supposed to have security because it needs to switch in a microsecond or milliseconds or something like that. So this is what I call, it's soft inside, but it has a hard shell. This is OT, right? When you get in there, yeah, we don't want hacker in there because they will have a playground. So that's why we are securing the architecture so much and so much focused. So where is the vulnerability, or what vulnerability is interesting for us? We need to understand that as well. But that is possible when we understand the assets, we have the software, so it's all part of this modeling process. The best thing is, think like a hacker, try to be the bad guy, try to figure out, and get help, ask questions. Some of the best one has been going over to some process engineers when I've been on the site. It was actually a manufacturing site. And this guy come over to me, you should look at this and this and this. I told management so many times, but they don't listen. And yes, this was really bad, right? So we could go in and easily reconfigure the switches, the firewalls, and everything. So this is why you need to be on site. This is not because we are not giving value back to the business. This is actually because we need to help each other to actually protect these sites. So what's the change? So the change here is we need to go more into understanding the processes, so the industrial environments. We need to understand the mechanics, as I told, but the relationship to the society, and to be able to protect how they can access or in what way. So the iceberg is a classic. Yeah, again, it's classic in this one. We can only protect what we see or what we know. So this is why I say that we need that access. So how can we better protect industrial asset systems? Yes, understanding it, where it is, understanding the vulnerabilities, and try to be the bad guy. When you have those threat vectors, or whatever you call it, attack points or attack strategy, it's a lot of things, then you can start protecting it and say, okay, if I have this, what then? One case I had when I did a penetration test was they had bought a next-gen firewall. That's cool, great. But if they're still using not next-gen rules, it doesn't help any much. It's kind of like a nice packing, but nothing inside. So we could go through. So think about it, if we need to understand. So if you put in a firewall in that and that place, we use those rules, retest, can we do it now? And that's the development process. So again, understanding our back. I want to tell you about one thing here, because I'm now trying to think different. So in the last many years, the PLC vendors had got a lot of bad talks from IT security and OT security people because it's so unsecure, it's so bad, and so on. I think they're doing really well, and I can see that a lot of new PLCs, and RTUs as well, do have a lot of security features in it. But can a hacker use them? Think about when you're implementing this new great secure PLC, and you put it into your factory or your plant. Do you use them or do you disable them? Mostly disable them, right? So the manufacturer is the manufacturer is saying, yes, I'm doing the security. The asset owner is implementing for this easier because we don't need them. But what if the hacker gets in and enables them? Then we are suddenly seeing that the hacker is using the security features against us. And that has actually been a talk for some time, in a couple of months, and somebody is showing how they can do this. And recovering from this is really difficult, because it's not only the running code, because you can't change the code afterward, because that is secured. So we need sometimes, and why I have this with me is because sometimes we need to think a bit out of the box and see what kind of other things than normal assessment hacking process is done. How can this new feature be used against us? So this is very important to understand. I have seen SANS did have a session on it on their conference. They will do a YouTube called something, Don't Say a Peep. But what they actually did was actually showing that a hacker could set off using these security features as a ransomware kind of top. So you don't need to exploit the ransomware, you just lock out all of your PLCs in the factory. Or even better, you can change some code so it does it a bit differently. Just think about that cost. So it's really difficult to get back for that. So this is something I think is very important when we do assessments. We need to think out of the box. We need to think differently and see, is there anything here that can be used against us? This is not only doing assessment in a power plant or a manufacturing facility. What about a building like this? The building automation. What if I could control the heat, so I cool it down and I cool up again, and I shut the lights or lock the doors or whatever. And then I can put on a pin code on the small PLCs that control this one, and nobody will be able to get out of the building if I don't want to. So what I'm saying here is, like, we need to understand that we can use this, so all these new great features we have, and I believe it's great that we have them, but we just need, when you're doing an assessment, also to think, how can this be used against us? Always look at different angles on this one. So I talked about this natural gas plant, and I got a view of everything. I don't understand half of it, but I got a good view to understand this is actually a chemical plant as well. So what if I change something in the chemical? How big impact will that have on the producing of energy? And everything here has a cascading effect. So if you know where to push, it's like a domino, and that's one thing that is very special for OT, is that this is system connected. So there is not one PLC, it's a closed system. You need to understand the process of this.